The transition from a conservative imperial China to a modern republic was not a smooth period. One man, out of great strategy and intelligence, would however seize the opportunities of these chaotic times. In his life, he would end over 2 millennia of imperial rule, transform bands of traditional Chinese soldiers into a completely modernized army, and change the fate of China for decades. Such a man was the assertive President Yuan Shikai. In the twilight of a weakened Qing dynasty, the last dynasty of China, in 1859, Yuan Shikai was born from a wealthy and aristocratic family in the heart of Henan province. Most of his family members were either scholars or officers in the army. At a young age, he was educated in the Confucian tradition, as was done in the elites. He, however, also found great interest in boxing, riding, and war strategy. When his uncle died in 1873, followed by his father the year after, he had to start taking care of his family, being the only young man present. This was his first of many responsibilities he would have in his life. In 1876, at about 17 years of age, Yuan Shikai got married to his first wife, the daughter of a wealthy man, who would give him a son 2 years later. That same year, the young man, hoping to pursue a civil service career, took the Imperial Civil Service examinations, a necessary test for any aspiring scholar in Imperial China. He was, however, unsuccessful on this first attempt. After spending time to take care of his family, and especially his newborn son and wife, the young man decided to prepare for the examinations once more. In 1879, Shikai attempted the tests and was yet again unsuccessful. Not giving up on his ambitions, he decided to enter politics through another means, the army. As many of his relatives had served in the Huai army, he decided to enlist there. This force, contrarily to both the Han Green Standard Army and Manchu Eight Banners Army of the late Qing dynasty, wielded modern weapons and was similar to a militia in its structure. Its members therefore held personal rather than institutional loyalty. The Huai army had been created by statesman Li Hongzhang during the Taiping Rebellion, a politician and prominent official who was still in charge of it. To accelerate his social ascension, Yuan's family purchased a minor title for him, a widespread practice in the late Qing dynasty. And in 1881, he became a personal assistant to the army's general, Wu Zhangqing, who happened to be a family cousin. Under his wing, he would learn the skills of leading men, an aptitude he would use for the rest of his life. China was relatively calm at this period, as both opium wars and recent rebellions had passed. On the other side of the Yalu River, however, on the Korean peninsula, mounting unrest reached concerning levels. The local Joseon dynasty was a tributary state to the Chinese Empire since centuries, but was completely autonomous nonetheless. In the country, a power struggle erupted between a conservative faction of traditional troops led by the king's father, Yi Haung, and reformists led by the king's spouse, Queen Myeongsong, who advocated opening up the country. When news of this insurrection reached China, Li Hongzhang, the father of the Huai army, dispatched his troops, led by General Wu Zhangqing and his assistant Yuan Shikai, counting 4,500 men. Rapidly, the rebellion in Korea was put to an end, and Yi Haung was captured and placed under house arrest in China. As a result, Chinese influence over Korea was confirmed, and a number of Chinese troops were stationed in the peninsula permanently. Following his modernization policies, the King of Korea requested the training of several hundred Korean soldiers in modern warfare, a task that was given to Yuan Shikai. The officer was noted for his efforts by Li Hongzhang and promoted to the rank of sub-prefect. Yuan Shikai's fame increased rapidly while serving in Korea. When the Huai army's general, Wu Zhangqing, died in 1884, Yuan Shikai became his new commandant. On the other side of the sea, the Empire of Japan, that had modernized greatly in the previous decades and had begun to have imperialist ambitions, set its eyes on its closest neighbor, Korea. The Japanese supported an attempted coup in Korea in 1884 against the king and queen, that was overturned thanks to the Chinese intervention of Yuan Shikai's troops. Tensions escalated between China and Japan, who both coveted the Joseon dynasty, but with diplomacy, peace was restored, under the condition that both nations withdraw their troops from the peninsula. A status quo was consequently established between the two empires over the control of Korea. For his successful intervention, Yuan Shikai received praise from both the Chinese and Korean nobility. In 1885, at the age of 25, he was promoted to Imperial Resident of Seoul, acting as representative of the Qing Empire in the country. The young man stayed in Korea for many years, meddling with local affairs, a period during which he took 3 Korean concubines, from which he would later have 15 children. The Joseon dynasty was still unstable, and in 1894, trouble appeared again in the country, as the Donghak peasant rebellion broke out. Radical members of a conservative sect in the countryside launched a revolt, attempting to overthrow Korean authorities. Consequently, Chinese help had to be requested again. The Hongjiang dispatched the troops once more, led by Yuan Shikai. As soon as news of this reached the Japanese, however, they accused the Chinese of having sent forces without notifying them, violating the agreement and status quo. They therefore also sent troops from the Imperial Japanese Army, under the pretext of protecting Japanese trade interests in Korea. In parallel, Yuan Shikai was recalled to China and left Seoul. Tensions sparked out between both empires, and after Japan refused to withdraw its forces, war inevitably broke out. Full of confidence due to millennia of domination over other East Asian nations, China thought this conflict would be easily won. But Japan had radically changed and modernized for the past decades, including in warfare and strategy. In only a year, in mid-1895, for the first time in history, the Chinese Empire was defeated by a former tributary state. In the peace treaty, Taiwan was handed over to the Japanese, as was the Korean Protectorate. The Chinese Beiyang fleet had been sunk to the bottom of the Yellow Sea, the coffers were depleted, foreign influence was growing stronger and stronger. It was clear that urgent reforms were necessary for China. During the conflict, the Qing Empire had raised new forces, but this time the recruited soldiers were armed only with modern weapons and underwent modern training by German advisors. This force was later to be given to General Yuan Shikai to command and further train in December 1985. It became the New Army, first fully modernized forces of the empire. Yuan Shikai became prominent as the head of this army and accumulated several titles. Meanwhile, political divisions within the government grew stronger and stronger. On one side, the Guangxu Emperor urged for radical reforms, and on the other, Empress Dowager Cixi, largely responsible for the failure of the Sino-Japanese War, enforced conservatism. Pro-emperor figures pleaded to Yuan Shikai as he controlled a powerful force, asking him to assist them in the reforms and in removing Cixi from power, thanks to his new army. His main task would be to kill Cixi's champion and close supporter, General Ronglu, who also led modernized forces, and then take control of his troops. Meanwhile, the conservative of the court also conspired to remove Guangxu from power and make sure the reforms would be aborted. Yuan Shikai decided not to side with the reformists, and he supposedly told General Ronglu of the reformist plot, advising him to take rapid actions. Therefore, Ronglu stormed the Forbidden City in 1898, capturing the main reformist leaders and the emperor. Guangxu was put under house arrest away from power, becoming a puppet to Cixi. The reformist leaders were executed, condemning the reform. For having aided the conservatives, the Empress Dowager, who is now sole leader of the country, appointed Yuan Shikai as governor of Shandong, further increasing his status. By now, the 40-year-old general could already count many feats, but he still had much more to accomplish. Discontent with foreign aggression, westernization, widespread corruption, and the inefficiency of the Manchu-led Qing dynasty, Han ethnic Chinese peasants rose in arms with the aim to overthrow the Qing and destroy the foreigners. These rebels, under the banner of the Yi-Tuan, would be known in the West as the Boxers. Violence escalated, and after their attacks on foreign nationals and siege on the international legation's quarter in Beijing, the foreign nations got together and organized a military response. An expeditionary force was set up and sent to China against the Boxers, the 8-nation alliance. The Qing authorities had now completely lost control over the situation. Following their conservative policies, they decided to make peace with the rebels. Cixi invited Boxer leaders, and they agreed to fight together against the foreign alliance. China therefore formally declared war on the 8-nation alliance. Several Qing generals, however, realized there was no possible way to defeat the foreign expeditionary forces, too strong both by numbers and technology. They consequently ignored imperial orders to attack it, and instead got together to suppress the Boxers in the region they controlled, a clique known as the Mutual Protection of Southeast China. It included Li Hongzhang, Yuan Shikai in Shandong, and several other generals. The Boxer rebels were utterly crushed by 1901, and the Qing Empire was ruined. For his support in the rebellion, Yuan Shikai gained much respect from the foreign powers, who granted him loans to expand his army. The Shandong governor kept a close eye on the state of his forces and fought against opium. Any soldier found to consume opium was forcibly sent to rehabilitation programs. In order to develop fast, he recruited several German advisors to guide him in modernization. In Shandong, he founded several institutions and universities, providing Western education. 2 months after the end of the Boxer Rebellion, Li Hongzhang, drained from intense negotiations with the foreign powers, died. Yuan Shikai took up his positions as Viceroy of Zhili and Minister of Beiyang, becoming more and more powerful. Keep in mind that he also still held practically all of the new army, now baptized Beiyang Army, that he kept developing and improving. During the years that followed, with his new influence, he made large efforts to westernize the territory he controlled, as well as influencing statewide reforms in the Qing court. Empress Dowager Cixi and Emperor Guangxu both died in November 1908. The late monarch, in his will, had ordered the execution of Yuan Shikai for his betrayal 10 years earlier, but he managed to escape this fate thanks to powerful allies in the court. He was, however, unable to avoid all persecution. Prince Chun, the regent of the new emperor, the 3-year-old Puyi, stripped him of his positions and titles and sent him into exile. The Beiyang army was, however, still loyal to him. Yuan Shikai withdrew to a small village in Henan, where he enjoyed fishing and poetry. While away, he nonetheless kept close ties with other generals and patiently waited for the next events. In October 1911, revolutionaries within the army that had long planned to overthrow the dynasty launched the Wuchang Uprising, a full-scale armed rebellion led by General Li Yuanhong. This successful movement was part of a revolutionary current that would increase until the Xinhai Revolution. The revolution, led by Dr. Sun Yat-sen, intended to create a republic for China. Realizing they were losing the conflict, the Qing authorities became desperate. After much consideration, they decided to ask for Yuan Shikai to return and lead his Beiyang army against the revolutionary forces. The man refused until the court had to beg Yuan Shikai to return, offering him greater and greater titles at each refusal. Finally, in November 1911, after many propositions by the court, he accepted, endorsing the title of Prime Minister of the Imperial Cabinet. Now in full control of all Imperial Chinese army, his trusted modernized troops, Shikai managed to capture cities and push back the rebels. He, however, rapidly realized that if the revolution failed, the Qing would no longer have use of him and dismiss him again. Yuan Shikai therefore secretly began negotiating with the rebels. After talks were held, an agreement was reached. Yuan Shikai would oversee the abdication of the child Emperor Puyi, formally ending the Qing dynasty, and in counterpart would be given presidency over the soon-to-be official Republic of China, replacing Sun Yat-sen, the provisional president. During the following weeks, negotiations were held between the Republicans who controlled the south of the country and Imperials in the north. Meanwhile, Yuan Shikai, in his comfortable position, heavily influenced them, and finally on the 12th of February 1912, under the final imperial edict, the Qing dynasty ceased to exist. Over 2 millennia of imperial rule were over. The young Puyi abdicated and the whole country became a republic. 2 days later, the Republican Senate elected Yuan Shikai as provisional president of the Republic of China, following the agreement. Sun Yat-sen stepped down. The Republicans, however, managed to keep a minor influence, as Li Yuanhong, the leader of the Wuchang Uprising, stayed vice president. In a symbolic sign, Yuan Shikai cut his queue like the revolutionaries, showing to the world he no longer supported the imperial cause. The new president was sworn in on the 10th of March in Beijing, becoming the official head of state of China at the age of 52. Both the army and police obeyed to him. The first parliament elections were held that same year. Several groups that had participated in the revolution merged into the Nationalist Party that would prove most popular in the elections. It however did not have a strong military force contrary to President Yuan Shikai, who still controlled the Beiyang army. Song Jiaoren, the leader of the Nationalist Party, actively campaigned against Yuan Shikai, who pushed for a presidential-led republic, rather than a parliamentary republic that most politicians wished for. In response, on the 12th of March 1913, when Song Jiaoren was travelling to the parliament in Beijing to attend a session, he was assassinated in Shanghai Station. Although most likely responsible, Yuan Shikai was not prosecuted for lack of evidence and only saw his influence strengthen. In April, the president secured a foreign loan of 25 million sterling pounds for his Beiyang army, granting in exchange privileges to foreign powers. Obviously, as the revolution had mainly been prompted due to the country's weakness against foreign aggression, this was not well received. The Nationalist Party considered these actions treacherous and openly denounced the president. Angered, he decided to take military actions against it, and in July 1913, as 7 provinces rebelled against Yuan Shikai, organizing the Second Revolution, the president dispatched his generals. The Revolutionary Army was no match for Yuan Shikai's Beiyang troops and was crushed. Nanking, symbolic capital of the Republic, was captured. Sun Yat-sen and other revolutionaries had to flee to Japan. In order to consolidate his power, Yuan then formed a cabinet composed mainly of generals from his army. To acquire and reinforce international recognition, he led the Russian Empire meddle with Mongolia and Britain with Tibet. By January 1914, Yuan had the parliament formally dissolved, ensuring a presidential-led republic. He now controlled finances, foreign policy, law and the military. To maintain his control over the country, he placed his generals at the head of the provinces, controlling each a private army. This would later lead to the Warlord era. Economically, his good relations with many foreign nations encouraged them to invest in the country, boosting the economy. Far away from the east, Europe had its own instability. The First World War broke out and Japan rapidly decided to join the Allies. In 1914, the Imperial Japanese Army besieged and captured Tsingtao, at the time a German colony in Shandong province, and occupied the area and its surroundings. Growing confident, the Empire of the Rising Sun issued a list of 21 demands to the Republic of China, essentially extending its control and influence over Chinese territory. After several weeks of negotiations, Yuan Shikai agreed to most of them, partly to get personal support from the Empire of Japan, and the treaty was signed on the 8th of May 1950. This event greatly degraded Yuan's image in China, as his weakness in accepting Japan's demand reminded the population once more of the end of the Qing dynasty. The president stayed, however, unconcerned of public opinion. His ambitions, much like unrest in the country, grew even stronger. He gradually reinstated Confucian rituals into the government, even leading some of them himself, like the emperors of old, such as sacrificial ceremonies at the Temple of Heaven. Whispers of a revival of monarchy began to circulate. On the 20th of November 1915, the president organized an exceptional representative assembly composed of his supporters that unanimously offered him the throne of China. Without further ado, Yuan Shikai accepted. The Empire of China would be re-established. A new flag, a new anthem and a new currency were designed. Yuan Shikai would rule under the name of Emperor Hongxian. The monarchy would be restored on the 1st of January 1916. Unsurprisingly, the revolutionaries like Sun Yat-sen in exile in Japan immediately prepared another revolution to overthrow him. What the soon-to-be emperor did not expect, however, was that widespread protests began all over the country. A great number of his own generals and supporters abandoned him, forming their own factions, a prelude to the warlord cliques. Several foreign nations turned hostile, and even his sons began a dispute for the title of Crown Prince. Only a handful of generals and officials stayed close to him. General Cai E, a strong supporter of democracy and sworn enemy of Yuan Shikai, rallied his forces in Yunnan province into what would become the National Protection Army. He launched an ultimatum to Yuan Shikai, giving him 2 days to cancel the monarchy restoration. Stubborn, the soon-to-be emperor did not accept, and finally on the 25th of December 1915, Cai E launched a rebellion known as the National Protection War to depose him. He was rapidly joined by other republican generals. Yuan Shikai dispatched 80,000 troops to Yunnan to counter the rebellion, but they were rapidly defeated and started to retreat. Some provinces even took the occasion to declare full independence. Due to these events, the national budget was cut short. The Emperor Hongxian, after only 83 days of reign, was forced to step down and abandon the monarchy. He however made it clear that he would stay president of the restored republic. His opponents were not satisfied with this and wanted him to step down from presidency as well, some even wanting him dead. All this stress and unrest greatly affected Yuan Shikai. His health, that had been declining for several months, drastically worsened. Although more and more people opposed him, he did manage to maintain his role as president and rule over the regions surrounding Beijing, the others having become autonomous. After last weeks of illness though, Yuan Shikai died on the 6th of June 1916. A state funeral was held, with military and state officials attending the procession. Yuan Shikai's body was transported by train back to his home province. A mausoleum was built for him that would later be looted by generals and troops during the Warlord era. Upon his death, Vice President Li Yuanhong stepped into power, with Yuan Shikai as premier. The premier, however, had more power than the new president, and both fought against each other. In the rest of the country, many generals regrouped in cliques that controlled the regions, also battling each other. Sun Yat-sen prepared yet another revolution in Guangzhou to create a rival government, which would become the Kuomintang. With Yuan Shikai's death, the last figure of a central government was destroyed, and the immensely complicated Warlord era began. Thank you for watching my video, I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below.